Hey everybody, Barry here again, back with part 2 of the harness rework. Yesterday I got as far as taking all these wires here out. I'm done with the connector side now. I pulled them all back as far as right here. Now I'll continue pulling one wire at a time into the end of the harness. This plug in here is left and all of these wires come in and go this way. So I would say that when I get these wires pulled and the connectors start to come out, it'll be pulling them out of this connector too. I'm not exactly sure what this one here is, but I suspect that one will be going too. And then we'll be left with our connector for the fuse block. So let's continue on pulling more wires. So it looks like we're ready to pull out our first sensor. So here is what I think is the evap control solenoid sensor. Here's the wire that we pulled completely from the PCM, and it leads us to this connector. And we're going to follow this pink wire, which comes to this one, out to right here. And we follow that one until it comes up to this pin right here. So I'll pull the connector out of that one and then pull that connector out and throw it away. And here we have it pulled out. Now I always keep connectors, so I'll cut that off and leave 3 or 4 inches. And I also like to keep these wires here because, oh, not that end, this end here has the PCM connector end on it. Another thing I didn't mention earlier is I like to keep all the loom. Every piece of loom. Even though it might be old, it's all still in really good shape, and there's some various lengths. So when you're redoing the harness, like relooming it, you can reuse lots of pieces of that loom, and you're gonna have a lot left over because you're gonna have circuits that you pulled out. So you can get quite the collection. We're done stripping the harness. That means pulling out wires from sensors we didn't need, like EGR and the rear oxygen sensors. So now what we're left with is this. This is every wire that I took out, which looks intimidating. but there's also a couple of connectors in here that I want to save because I do like these GM connectors. And this is our harness. It looks pretty scary right now, but it's a whole lot cleaner than it was. So let's break it down. Here's our PCM connectors, our fuse block connector. Here's one that I still have to cut and either remove a couple of wires or label them. I know this wire is the oil pressure feed, so if the guy wants to put a gauge on it, he can use this oil pressure feed. And this sensor here, I'll go over that one after. Here's our coil and injector connectors for the bank 1. Throttle position sensor, IAT, or idle air control valve, sorry, and the alternator. Coolant temperature sensor, block ground that goes down behind the power steering pump. Here's our starter solenoid wire and crank sensor. There's the oil pressure plug-in, cam sensor, another ground behind the block. And here's our map sensor, our bank 2 injector and coil plug, mass airflow sensor here. That's the oxygen sensor. And our transmission stuff. Speed sensor connector is right here. So when you break it down, it's basically plug and play, because the way the sensor is laid out, it goes from the PCM across the top of the engine, and the crank sensor and solenoid wire go down and under the engine and around to the back. You can see how these injector plugins are laid out, so they go click, click, click right in the right spot. Mass airflow comes out around the engine, plugs into the sensor here. So it's a lot of easy stuff. I'm gonna go and tape it back up together after I look at these two plugins here to see what outputs they are, because a lot of those are just outputs for serial data for the OBD2 and outputs for your vehicle speed sensor and a couple of those. So I'll label those as I go. Also, you can see the importance of keeping everything taped together and in the right orientation. If I didn't tape all this together here, this junction wouldn't be there, this junction wouldn't be there, the injectors wouldn't be at the right distance apart, and you'd have a lot of problem getting stuff to fit, and wires either being way too long or way too short. So always tape your wires together. We have one less connector, two less actually, the little one's gone too. So here are our outputs, which all came into this connector here. I imagine that went up to the gauge cluster. So here we have, it's upside down, oil pressure signal and vehicle speed sensor output sensor. This is brake light switch for transmission control, that's for torque converter. Tach signal, OBD2 serial data. So we do have a few outputs here, so that's not too bad. Now I need to switch over one wire here that controls the PCM and transmission. I gotta switch it from, I can't remember what pin to what pin, but I'll look on my notes there again and see which one it is. We'll get to that. So I think I'll do that tomorrow. So that's gonna be it for this video, because I imagine this one's getting kind of long too. And we will dive right into it again tomorrow. It's completely stripped, so that's really nice to have that done so quick. And then tomorrow we can start reassembling the harness after I get a couple pins changed over in the fuse block.